Hey, how are we doing, everybody? First time Heaven Hill Distillery YouTube Live. Welcome to my back patio. Hope everyone is doing great tonight. We are here to talk about some amazing whiskeys from Heaven Hill Distillery. I couldn't be more excited to be here with you on this first YouTube Live. My name is Jack Choate. I am one of the two whiskey ambassadors, whiskey educators for Heaven Hill Distillery. I have the enviable position of hopefully soon getting back to traveling around and talking about the great whiskeys from Heaven Hill Distillery. Not only the whiskeys that we've been making recently, but the ones that we've been making nonstop for the last 85 years. Since December 13th, 1935, to be exact, was when we barreled our first barrel of whiskey. And really from that day forward, almost entirely, we have been family owned and family operated by the Shapira family out of Louisville, Kentucky, and out of Bardstown, Kentucky. Tonight, we are going to be talking about some whiskeys of ours that have won some awards. Nobody really likes to talk about awards until you win them, but we've won a few lately, so I figure I might as well get on here, try out this YouTube Live stuff, and talk about it, you know? So the four whiskeys that we're going to talk about today, or tonight, excuse me, are Larceny Barrel Proof, World Whiskey Winner of the Year from Whiskey Advocate in 2020, Elijah Craig Rye, Whiskey Advocate's number 7 World Whiskey of the Year in 2020. Old Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond, Whiskey Advocate's number 4 Whiskey of the Year in 2019. And then the first one that really got this conversation started in the recent times during the bourbon boom, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, World Whiskey of the Year back in 2017. Man, that feels like a long time ago, especially after the last 18 months, doesn't it? Well, as I go ahead and pour myself a little bit of this Larceny Barrel Proof, I'm going to talk a little bit about the process for, I just love watching this stuff pour. It is so good. I find myself in Florida today, so, nothing's really pouring like it used to in my former home site of San Francisco. Nothing's really pouring like maple syrup. It's a little bit warmer. Things are moving a little bit faster down here. But as I nose this Larceny Barrel Proof, this fantastic wheated bourbon, the heir to the Old Fitzgerald fame, I'll talk a little bit about the World Whiskey of the Year awards and what our friends at Whiskey Advocate do, how they operate that competition. To actually not really a competition, pretty good segue for myself right there. I'll go ahead and pat myself on the back. So Whiskey Advocate actually is constantly accepting samples from distilleries through not only throughout America, but throughout the world for whiskeys, just for them to conceptualize, to judge, to taste, to see what's going on. So it's a process that's really ongoing throughout the year, unlike some other competitions that you may have heard of. The San Francisco World Spirits Competition is one that we have been lucky enough to be pretty successful in over the course of the last few years. That's one where they actually call for submissions, and you're submitting whiskey, and you're having judges all convene in one place at one time, and they're all tasting over the course of a handful of days or a week or whatever it is. But with the World Whiskey of the Year competition with Whiskey Advocate, it's really an ongoing process. It lives and breathes throughout the year. And samples are being submitted sort of as distilleries see fit. And then, of course, they give out those awards in November every year. And like I said, as I went through these four, we've been very fortunate over the last few years. We've been very fortunate since back in the days of Malt Advocate, as it's become Whiskey Advocate, as they've changed editors through the time, as people have grown in that company. We've grown with them, and we feel very fortunate to the relationship that we have with them. But on to this whiskey. And by the way, if you have any more interest in reading up on those awards and all of the whiskeys that have won, I mean, heck, you can do just an amazing education on whiskey around the world just by going over to whiskeyadvocate.com and checking out the award winners, not only from 2020, but from the previous years, even further back than 2017 that I mentioned. I tend to go back and look at those quite often. It's a great publication and a lot of really great information for those of us that live and breathe whiskey, right? So, Larceny Barrel Proof, as I said, the Larceny brand is an heir to the Old Fitzgerald brand. Of course, the Old Fitzgerald brand has about 175 almost years of history from S.C. Herbst. To Pappy Van Winkle and the Stitzel Weller Distillery, of course, to where it is now at home with Heaven Hill Distillery, where it has been since we acquired the brand in 1999. We, of course, put out our first Larceny small batch telling the true story of Johnny Fitzgerald. Of course, he was the treasury agent in charge of monitoring all the locked and bonded rickhouses. And of course, as we found out from Sally Van Winkle Campbell's book, he was not necessarily tasting the best barrels, but all of the barrels, sneaking in the middle of the night, stealing sips, therefore committing larceny. I mean, come on. It was a true story told by the last surviving master distiller. How can you not love a true story like that in the world of spirits and American whiskey? Well, we released the 92 proof small batch Larceny in 2012 to limited markets. And then, of course, over the next 5 or 6 years, it just gained popularity faster and faster. And soon enough, it was a nationwide product. And in 2020, we actually released the barrel proof. It was a private release for an event that we did a few summers ago. Similar story to how the Elijah Craig barrel proof came to be. And we put that out. And I can tell you, the first time I tasted it, I think I was actually one of the first people to taste it, do an event with it in Los Angeles back in December 2019, a fantastic restaurant in Los Angeles called Providence. Shout out to Kim and the chef out there. We did a tasting of actually Old Fitzgerald distillate from barrel proof, from barrel entry at 125 up through the years. 2 years old at barrel proofs, 4 years old at barrel proof, 6 years old at barrel proof, and 8 years old at barrel proof. And then finally we tasted the Larceny barrel proof to really see what that whole lifetime was like of that wheated bourbon. And good Lord, I was blown away. It really stopped me in my tracks how good it was. And maybe it's just something that happens in this great job that I have of working for Heaven Hill and traveling around talking about our great whiskeys. But I had sort of just put Larceny barrel proof to the side. And when that award came out, man, I was like, oh yeah, I remember. That first sip I had was absolutely knocked me on the floor, knocked my socks off. But so this is wheated bourbon, and we're going to talk through 3 of the mash bills that we at Heaven Hill make. Of course, we make 5 mash bills as defined by the U.S. Standards of Identity. We make our bourbon rye. We make our wheated bourbon. So this is our wheated bourbon. We make a rye whiskey. We make a corn whiskey, and we make a wheat whiskey. Altogether, those 5 take up 30 days of the month. We're probably making wheated bourbon 2 or 3 days out of the month, and that's what this beautiful liquid is. So when we're talking about wheated bourbon, and you hear wheat, of course, we know that bourbon has to have a minimum of 51% corn. Well, in this, wheat instead of rye as the secondary grains, we've got about 68% corn in this, 20% wheat, and 12% malted barley. So corn, think of the type of bread. Think of cornbread, right? Very sweet, very approachable. You don't meet too many people that turn their nose up at a free offering of cornbread, right? Wheat bread, the joke that I like to make, wheat bread is really just the vehicle to get the bacon, lettuce, and tomato in your mouth. I'm from Georgia, so a lot of BLTs in my lifetime. But that's how wheat works in bourbon, right? It's soft, it's a little sweet, but it's just sort of there helping deliver that sweet corn profile. And now, of course, this whiskey is in that upper tier of range, in that 6 to 10 year old range. So it's going to have a lot of wood characteristics too. So you're going to get a lot of body, a lot of backbone from that wood. And I often get asked, of the barrel proof whiskeys that you drink, which one do you like to drink neat? And each and every day it's this one, although a close second to our Elijah Craig barrel proof, and then some of the other barrel proofs that I've been lucky enough to try from our friends down the roads in Kentucky and across the highways and byways of American whiskey. But this, because of what I just laid out, that sweetness, that easy approach that a wheated bourbon allows you, it's the one that I go to neat more often than other times. I mean, that said, I do prefer an ice cube in barrel proof bourbon. I'm drinking it neat tonight, because it's July 7th. You got to keep it neat. I don't know what that means. It just sounded right in my head, so I said it. But anyhow, so this Larceny barrel proof. I mean, this is the B521 release. It is at 121 proof or 60.5 ABV. So what does B521 mean? So all of our barrel proof releases, they have a letter at the front, a number as their second character, and then they have 2 digits at the end. So it's either going to be an A, B, or a C. The A is the first release of the year. The B is the second release of the year. The C, of course, is the third release of the year. And then that number, usually it's going to be a 1, a 5, or a 9. So that signifies the month. So A1 is usually the first release in January. B5, the second release in May. And then C9, which is how it usually plays out, the third release in September. And then, of course, those last 2 numbers are the year. So B521 is going to be our second release of the year in May of 2021. So 121 proof, Larceny barrel proof. Cheers to John E. Fitzgerald. That is delicious. I did not finish that, so I'm going to put that aside for later. I don't know if we have any hockey fans out there. I am a huge hockey fan, and the Stanley Cup could be awarded tonight. So we will revisit the Larceny barrel proof and probably each one of these after I'm done speaking to you tonight as I watch the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Montreal Canadiens. So through the power of television, I actually already have a bottle of Elijah Craig Rye open. But here is a beautiful full bottle of Elijah Craig Rye. What a fancy little guy Elijah Craig Rye is. Now, I'll be honest with you. Elijah Craig Rye wasn't my favorite pour the first time I opened it and drank it. And I'll tell you why. Rye is not my favorite type of American whiskey. I actually have a hard time drinking it, hard time enjoying it, or I should say I did. Because my brain told me that I didn't like rye, because I didn't like rye bread growing up as a kid. Remember what I said, cornbread sweet, wheat bread just the vehicle to get the bacon, lettuce, and tomato in your mouth. Rye bread, I was like, get out of here. Yeah, Ryan, I agree. It is a fantastic value. I mean, along with every one of these bottles that we're tasting tonight, and really every bottle in our portfolio, I mentioned that we've been family owned and operated by the Shapiro family, and they've always been operating under this mantra that Max Shapiro, who immigrated from Lithuania in and around 1879, 1880, he always taught his sons who started Heaven Hill Distillery back in 1935 that we offer our customers the best possible product at the best possible price. And I would say that this portfolio just reflects that tagline, that mantra, day in and day out. But back to me and rye, really interesting question. A handful of years ago, I said, Jack, you've got to figure out what this holdup is that you have with rye. So I did a blind tasting. I'm trying to figure out what this shadow is on me, and I just realized that it's the bottles that are in front of me, which you can't see. So I'm actually going to tilt my camera down. Remember I said this is our first YouTube Live, so we're getting used to everything that's going on. I don't have a studio. Nope, that doesn't really work. We'll go back. Boop, boop, boop. We're going to put them over there. Pardon me. Steve loves rye too. So back to rye. So I started blind tasting a bunch of different ryes, and it was amazing to me the flavor profiles that I had never found in rye before that were popping out. And when I first opened Elijah Craig Rye, as everyone knows, we have a couple of other ryes in our portfolio: Rittenhouse Rye, Pikesville Rye, and Elijah Craig Rye. And the proof varies, the age varies. We have over 60 warehouses or rickhouses that are holding over 1.9 million barrels at Heaven Hill. So we have a lot of different places where we can pull barrels from, a lot of places where we can store barrels. And then Mother Nature sort of does the rest, right? Because our rickhouses they're built by a company called Busick, also a family owned and operated company. They're wood structures wrapped in tin. no heat control whatsoever. So it's really left up to Mother Nature, those flavor profiles that we're getting. You talk about the distiller's rule of thumb, where 50% of that final flavor profile comes from where, how, and why the barrels of whiskey age the way they do. And when I tasted Elijah Craig Rye against Pikesville, against Rittenhouse, it was a totally different flavor. To be honest, it wasn't really fair, because you're tasting 94 proof against 100 proof against 110 proof. But I did pull out some great tasting notes from it as I was going through it. And to be honest, as that first bottle that I opened, and I've now been through about 4 or 5 in the last 5 or 6 months of it, amazing flavor profiles that I didn't get in those first few minutes came out. And I've really grown to love Elijah Craig Rye, both neat and in an old fashioned. I mean, we talk about Elijah Craig bourbon for a bourbon old fashioned. I mean, if you want to go rye old fashioned, Elijah Craig Rye all day. I had a buddy over at my bar just a few steps away about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And before I'd even noticed it, we were already through about 3/4 of a bottle, just me and him hanging out, talking, drinking Elijah Craig Rye old fashions. It is such a great sipper. And it makes such a great old fashioned. I cannot recommend it enough. But 94 proof, let's go ahead and give this number 7 World Whiskey of the Year a taste. I don't talk a lot about tasting notes and flavor profiles. It can be somewhat intimidating, right? You hear people talk about marzipan and honey and tobacco and leather. And, I don't think anyone's really pulling out a fresh open can of tennis balls and whiskey or a fresh cut hose like they might be talking about Chardonnay or Savvy B. But, people talk about these tasting notes, and sometimes I don't even know what the words are. I mean, marzipan, I've really worked hard over the last 2 or 3 years to actually remember that word. And then, not to mention, go figure out what it actually means. I think it's like almond paste or something, right? But I heard a story about our former master distiller, Parker Beam, talking about how, he just tries to make good quality and consistent whiskey. And when he tastes his whiskey, when he used to taste our whiskey before his unfortunate passing back in 2017, he didn't taste tobacco. He didn't taste brown sugar. He just tasted good whiskey. And you know what? If that's all you taste in the glass when you pour something from Heaven Hill, or again, any of our friends down the road or across the highways and byes of America, that's really all that matters, because it's a personal thing. And or if you're enjoying it with your friends, it's a thing with your friends, and nobody's here to judge. Just drink responsibly. But that Elijah Craig Rye is so good, 94 proof, in that similar age range, up there in that 6 to 10-year-old age range. Just a wonderful pour. And our mash bill, if you're interested, if anybody's out there going to go try to recreate our mash bill of 51% rye, 35% corn, and 14% malted barley, we like to call that a Kentucky rye whiskey. Of course, the other styles of whiskey that are famous to American whiskey are, Pennsylvania rye and Maryland rye, where the settlers were originally making any type of whiskey, specifically rye whiskey, back in the probably late 17th century into the 18th century, before they made their way down to our home of Louisville, Kentucky, in and around the 1780s, 1770s or so. So up to the next one. Make sure I can remember which one I have when I go revisit these later in the evening. Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond. Any fans of Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond out there in YouTube world tonight? Ooh, I am. Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond, the number 4 world whiskey in 2019 in its year of release. I mean, pretty exciting. I mean, each of these Larceny Barrel Proof World Whiskey of the Year in its year of release. Elijah Craig Rye, number 7, in really its first full year of release. And of course, Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond, number 4 in its first year being out there on the map. A 7-year-old age statement, Bottled and Bond. Bottled and Bond. Shout out to my good buddy and colleague Bernie Lovers. Stay bonded, Bernie. Stay bonded to all you Bottled and Bond fans out there. Bottled and Bond has long been a very important part of the whiskey heritage and American history, really, to us at Heaven Hill. When we started in 1935, it was our goal to put out a bottled and bond whiskey. Of course, in 1937, we released a 2-year-old straight whiskey called Bourbon Falls, really to help us keep the lights on, but always with the focus on putting out a bottled and bond, which of course had become known as the good stuff after that regulation went into place in 1897. Of course, bottled and bond whiskey was the only type of whiskey you could get from a doctor's note or a prescription during those 13 crazy years of prohibition. 6 million prescriptions written for medicinal whiskey during those 13 years, which is crazy. But the Bottled and Bond Act of 1897 came to be, of course, after whiskey was really getting people sick and in some cases killing people. And it was the government's stamp of authenticity on what you were getting. You were getting it in a bottle. And what the Bottled and Bond Act states is that what's in this bottle must be from one distiller, from one distilling season. In a calendar year, there's 2 distilling seasons, January to June and July to December. It must be the mash bill of the same cereal grains. It must then be barreled, for 4 years, a minimum of 4 years. After it has aged for 4 years or longer, it must be bottled at exactly 100 proof, not 101, not 103, not 99.9, not 100.1, exactly 50% alcohol, 100 proof. And then you also must state on the bottle where it was both distilled, barreled, and bottled. And on this beautiful bottle right here, it actually states our DSPs on the bottom label. DSP KY1, which is our distillery in downtown Louisville, and DSP KY31, which is our barreling and aging, our aging and bottling facility out in Bardstown. Of course, that was the site of our original distillery from 1935 until November 7th, 1996, when we had a horrific fire and lost about 7 warehouses, just under 100,000 barrels of whiskey to that fire, which created a river downhill. And of course, the distillery was at the bottom of that hill. And whiskey on fire meeting the distillery was not a good combination. So that, of course, set us up to purchase the Bernheim facility in 1999 from United Distillers when we acquired that little brand that I spoke of earlier, Old Fitzgerald, to add to our stable. We're based in Kentucky. We talk a lot about horses as well. We added the Old Fitzgerald Bottled and Bond to our stable, our already growing, already very strong stable of Bottled and Bond whiskeys, which our good friend Fred Dominic actually gave Bernie Lovers credit for breathing life back into the Bottled and Bond classification of American whiskey a few years ago on a podcast, which I thought was really, really cool. If you've ever seen Bernie speak, which I imagine if you're here watching me, you probably have, Bernie is the biggest fan of Bottled and Bond, has taught me everything I know about Bottled and Bond and probably everything everyone out there knows about Bottled and Bond. And it is indeed the good stuff. And this bottle of Heaven Hill 7-year-old is 100% the good stuff. Available in limited markets now, but we'll get out there to you. Come visit me in Florida or find me along my travels as we start going in, and I'll buy you some. Maybe I'll have some in my pocket. Who knows? I mentioned earlier that we have 5 mash bills of Heaven Hill, but of course we have multiple brands of whiskey. You see a few others back here behind me over here. We're tasting through 4 tonight. And the mash bill that is the Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond is that HH regular, Heaven Hill regular, 78% corn, 12% malted barley, and 10% rye. That's the same mash bill that eventually becomes Henry McKenna, becomes Elijah Craig small batch, becomes the next whiskey that we're going to taste, Elijah Craig barrel proof. Ryan mentions JTS Brown, JW Dant. All of these come from the HH regular. If you talk to Connor O'Driscoll, lucky enough to get to see him do one of these, I'm sure he'll be following me on a YouTube live soon. He'll talk about HH Reg for certain. And we're making that mash bill about 26 to 27 days of every month. And then floating in the other 4 mash bills, maybe an experimental mash bill every now and again. Who knows? They don't tell me all of that information because I'm out here talking to you guys on YouTube, and you may spill the secrets. But yeah, it's exactly what I mentioned earlier. Those 63 warehouses, wood structures wrapped in tin. It's really up to Mother Nature what those whiskeys become. The whiskey barrels tell us what brands they're going to become. I mentioned the event that I did back in December in Los Angeles in 2019. We actually were biting our fingernails, hoping that we were going to get a bottle of Old Fitzgerald, and it was delayed because I came to find out when we went to pull some barrels that were older, they weren't up to the standards of Old Fitzgerald. So we had to go searching for some others, and that delayed the process. The barrels tell us what brand they're going to become. Please find me on my travels coming up once as the world gets back to normal. I would love to pour you some Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond. It is absolutely delicious. So up next, we have, I like to call it the Big Daddy, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. You know, when you're talking about our barrel proofs, when you're talking about Larceny and Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, you know, they sort of hit both sides of the spectrum, right? Larceny Barrel Proof has been pretty much in that 125 and under proof range, whereas Elijah Craig Barrel Proof has been over 140 proof. The Hazmat release, anyone had that one? I believe that was back in the fall of 2019. A great whiskey at 100 and just over 140 proof. I mean, the team. I mean, shout out to Tawny, Mike, Chris Briney, everyone out in Bardstown. I mean, what they're able to do with the whiskey coming out of those barrels in our warehouses, and what they're able to put in a bottle in that range, anywhere from 100 and 118 up to 140 proof. There's not a whole lot of difference in as far as in that perception when you're drinking it. But yeah, man, it's that 140 was nuts. But what we're drinking tonight is the B521, which is, you know, 118.2. I mean, it's an everyday proof, right? No, it's not. But I'm excited about it because, you know, as this tasting tonight, we're starting with the Larceny Barrel Proof, which is just over 120, as I mentioned, at 121, and then to the 94 proof with the rye and of course the Bottled and Bond and 100, and then 118 at barrel proof. It's a very consistent tasting. Of course, when we start with 121, that's a little put off, but again, it's the wheated bourbon, right? So it's going to be a little bit more approachable than, say, starting with the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, even at 118, because of course Elijah Craig Barrel Proof is that same HH regular, 78% corn, 10% rye, 12% malted barley. And that 12 plus years age in the barrel, it's just going to be more powerful on the palate, probably on the nose, as well as that Larceny Barrel Proof. So it's a good transitional tasting. You know, go up in proof, go similar mash bills, same mash bills, as you usually can't go wrong. Let me read some of the comments as I nose this beautiful Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. Ryan, I believe we do still have more Bottled and Bond products than other distilleries out there. It's pretty hard to tell, though. You know, we used, when Bernie was first teaching me about Bottled and Bond 7 or 8 years ago, you know, you could basically count every Bottled and Bond product on your fingers and your toes. And now that's virtually impossible unless you have about 20 friends with you. I actually can't put a number on the total number of Bottled and Bonds in the marketplace right now. But I can tell you that between January 1st and May 1st of this year, there were over 60 applications to the TTB for Bottled and Bond. So you could say that product range is growing. Mellow Corn Barrel Proof coming soon. I can tell you that there are some people that would be anxiously awaiting Mellow Corn Barrel Proof. I will tell you, we do have a new, we just totally revamped our visitor center in Bardstown, and you actually can get access. It's not Mellow Corn Barrel Proof, but you can get some access to Bernheim Barrel Proof, which is our wheat whiskey, which I cannot wait to get my hands on. The Parker's Heritage release back in 2014, which was our wheat whiskey at a proof above 100. I think it was 113. Actually, man, that stuff was knock your socks off good. You know, it's that similar mash bill to, you know, what we were talking about with the OFD or the Old Fitzgerald. So 51% 51% wheat, 37% corn, and 12% malted barley at over 100 proof. I imagine it's just going to be amazing. But back to knock your socks off good. But yeah, I mean, this is 118, and this tastes about 20 proof points higher than the Larceny Barrel Proof. But that's that rye grain in there as opposed to the wheat, and it's older as well, right? You know, the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof still has a 12-year-old age statement. I do believe, Ryan, that this is the lowest ever proof for Elijah Craig Barrel Proof at 118. But if you want to talk about the lowest ever proof for one of our barrel proofs, you can look at the Heaven Hill 27 year, which was just over 90 proof after being in a barrel for 27 years on the first floor. You know, we have dirt floors on the bottom of our warehouses, and a water molecule is smaller than an alcohol molecule. So water was actually seeping in from the dew in the ground to lower that proof over 27 years. Let's see. Other question that I got in here as I nose and sip on this Elijah Craig, it's a perfect segue. My favorite Heaven Hill expression, I mentioned it earlier in this tasting, is Elijah Craig small batch. It is my go-to each and every day. I would say if I had to fluctuate between that and another, it's probably the Evan Williams Bottle and Bond. But you know, 94 proof is a little bit smoother, a little bit easier to drink on the regular. But Evan Williams Bottle and Bond does a lot of the same as Elijah Craig small batch for me. You know, both easy to drink neat with a cube. Make a simple cocktail. Man, Elijah Craig small batch old fashioned. Talk about a perfect old fashioned. If you haven't had an Elijah Craig small batch old fashioned, go ahead and get you one, and then come back. I think it's October 14th to 25th, and check us out during Elijah Craig Old Fashioned Week, and we'll talk about some Elijah Craig Old Fashions. But then, you know, it works in an even more complex cocktail like a Boulevardier. So that would, of course, be equal parts Elijah Craig small batch, sweet vermouth, and Campari. And then you can mess around with the Elijah Craig rye and make an Old Pal. So just switch out that. Old Pal, of course, is basically the same cocktail. You're just switching out bourbon for rye. Do I prefer the Larceny Barrel Proof or the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof? Juliana, making me choose between my children. You know, it's a different drinking experience, right? I mean, I've got a little bit of that Larceny Barrel Proof here, a little bit of that Elijah Craig Barrel Proof here. Let me go ahead and see which one I prefer, and let me see if I can tell you why. We're just over the 30-minute mark, so this will probably be the last thing I do before I sign off this evening. If you have any other questions, feel free to throw them into the chat while we're waiting, or while you're waiting for me to taste. See, softer, good. You know, those good traditional bourbon notes, those caramel, those brown sugars. Oh, speaking of Larceny Barrel Proof, if you want to hear more about Larceny Barrel Proofs and it's the way that it won World Whiskey of the Year from Whiskey Advocate last year, go ahead and swing over to wherever you digest your podcast. Maybe it's Apple, maybe it's Spotify. I don't know. Maybe it's something crazy that I haven't heard of. Go ahead and download episode 13 of Tales from the Hill, which is our Heaven Hill podcast, which we're now in the third season of. But episode 13 talks all about Larceny Barrel Proof, the history of the brand of Larceny, talks a little bit more about Elijah Craig, John Fitzgerald. You can hear my good buddy Bernie talking about that, our master distiller Connor O'Driscoll, Josh Hafer, who's our head of communications, and as well as Susan Wall, who's in charge of all of our American whiskey, talking all about that process. But that's real tasty. Now onto the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. I mean, that's real tasty too. But I'm going to tell you, Juliana, hopefully I'm saying your name correctly. I would drink this neat, and I would put a cube in that. And then they would become very, very similar. Even though this is lower proof, I feel like I'm getting more alcohol on this, which is sort of nuts. I'm assuming that that's the combination of, you know, the rye grain combined with just more time spent in the barrel that gives it that little bit more of that, what I like to say, punch in the mouth. But yeah, that's an amazing taste. I hope everyone has enjoyed this conversation on Heaven Hill Distillery's World Whiskey of the Year award winners. And I hope everyone has an opportunity to try all of these. Larceny Barrel Proof, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, Elijah Craig Rye, and Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond. Boom, 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 and the Big Bopper. Boom. With that, everyone be well, and we'll see y'all soon. Cheers.